welcome to another episode of the Toby Talk here on the Toby Network. So if you're new to the Toby Talk, basically what it is, what we do here on this series is I kind of explain different things, but I explain it from my interpretation, how I've learned it, how I've digested it back for you all, and so that it can make it easier for you guys to learn, see if y'all vibe with it, etc. I like to think of myself as like a community little teacher, right? But I'm not trying to teach your little kids, right? That's it. Anyways, so on this episode of the Toby Talk, we're kind of doing things a little bit differently, right? Usually what I do is, like I said, I'll explain, different concepts, different topics that are out there in the wide universe and explain them from my version. But today, it's kind of something a little different. So it's kind of a term that I made up. Obviously, I'm saying I made up this term, but there's over 7 billion people in the world. So I'm pretty sure there's somebody else in the world who came up with this term as well, either before me, at the same time as me, or after me, etc. It's not that hard of a term to come up with. But regardless, right, it's a term that I use that's not in the mainstream, at least not that I've seen in the mainstream, right? So I'm kind of gonna, explain it for y'all and see how y'all vibe. It's kind of like when I did like the, in between binsta on, Toby's terms, hashtag recipes, Toby's terms. Yeah, it's kind of like that, What we're gonna talk about this episode is a term that I like to use called Zillenials. Yes, Zillenials. Now, if you're wondering what is a Zillennial, it's basically kind of, it's simple math, Put millennial plus Gen Z, take off the M, add the Z, Zillennials. Yes, Zillennials. Simple. In order to explain what a Zillennial is, you kind of have to have like a brief overview of what a millennial is and brief overview of what a Gen Z is. So from what I understand, the dates kind of shift and I'm not exactly sure which is which, but from my understanding, a millennial is somebody kind of born from like the 80s, like mid 80s, maybe early 80s, to around like 1995-ish, maybe 96 at the latest, right? So that kind of age gap, about a 15 to 16 year time period. And then Gen Z is somebody that's born sometimes 96, but I think the one that they settled on is 97 to about, is it 2015? So another, or 2012, another, or 2010. It's either one of those. It's 2010, 2012, or 2015. But it's another general around 15-year age gap. And that's kind of how they do the generations, around like 15 or so years, sometimes 20, but around that kind of age gap. So those are the time, those are like the time periods for them. And, I'm pretty sure if you're watching this, you've heard about millennials. You've heard like jokes about millennials, like boomers, baby boomers saying all these things about millennials, like, oh, millennials killed this, millennials killed that. Or, you see the sad millennial meme, or you see like, all the shade thrown to millennials and stuff, right? But, or like the 90s kids. The millennials are really big on like, yeah, I was a 90s kid because, they were really kids in the 90s. LOL, I used to think that I was a 90s kid because I was born in the late 90s, though they're really the 90s kids. I found out that I'm a 2000s kid. That's what it is. But yeah, really think of that whole aesthetic, that's really millennials. I don't know what else much to say about it off the top of my head because this isn't a, a millennials explain type video. But y'all know what millennials are, and if you don't, Google's your best friend. Like, this is, yeah. And now Gen Z, LOL, the crackheads of Gen Z. Gen Z is definitely, you think about Gen Z, they're the ones that came up with the term okay boomer. Think about the TikTok generation, like TikTok, all these influencers, a lot of them are Gen Z. Even if you look back at 2020, the revolutions that were going on in the United States and other parts of the world, mainly led by Gen Z, the protests and stuff like that, mainly led by Gen Z. Think about Euphoria. If you watch that show on HBO Max, and HBO, shout out to Zendaya. She a bad bitch and she knows it. We love it. Hit me up if you ever see this. But yeah, that type of shit. That's Euphoria, right? I mean, that's Gen Z. Yes. That's Gen Z. What a Zillennial is, basically, from what I created the term, came up with the term, whatever, right? It's basically the love child of Gen Z and millennials. So not in a way that you're thinking, not no creepy way, but kind of like somebody that falls between, the kind of cusp area where it's like, okay, I don't know if I'm really a millennial. I don't know if I'm really a Gen Z. What am I? And the way that I kind of conceptualized the term when I was like, oh, okay, millennial, is that I used to think that I was a millennial, like, because that's what people would say. They'd be like, oh, you millennials. And they would be talking to me and my sister who was born in 94, and even, my brother who was born in 99 and stuff like that. And we were like, oh, they're just like people my grade and stuff, like in high school, all stuff, they'd be like, oh, you millennials, blah, blah, this, millennials, that. So we really thought we were just millennials. So I was like, okay, I'm a millennial. I was born in 1997. So I was like, oh, I'm a millennial, cool. But then I started reading more about generations because I find the topic on generations to be super fascinating, right? So I was reading more, and they was not trying to say I'm a millennial. They was trying to say I'm a Gen Z. And I was like, wait a second. I was like, I'm not one of these Tide Pod eating motherfuckers. I was like, do not put me with these crackheads of Gen Z. I was like, whoa. I was like, I'm not a Gen Z. I'm a millennial. I remember 90s music. I remember some of these 90s shows. I remember, all these snacks like Dunkaroos and shit like that, even though I didn't really eat them. But, I remember these things. Lunchables was my shit, So was Kids Cuisine. I was like, don't fuck with me. I'm a millennial. I know who Biggie is. I know who Pocket. Like, what are you talking about? I'm a millennial. But, the evidence was really leaning heavy towards Gen Z. So I was like, okay, I'm a Zillenial. I was like, all right. Because then when I started reading more about Gen Z stuff, I was like, wait a second. I kind of do this. I was like, I'm kind of one of those people who was on Snapchat, or, I'm kind of, there's certain things that I'm starting to not really remember, from the past, or these millennials are talking about certain things and I'm like, ooh, I don't do that, or, oh, that's not me, what's going on? So, and I looked at my birth chart and I'm definitely Pluto and Sagittarius, which is the Gen Z placement. So I'm like, oh, wait a second, maybe what's going on, right? So I came up with the term Zillenial. Because I was like, all right, of course, it's me. I'm always having to exist in between the binaries. It's just how my life always is. I was like, okay, I'm neither fully Gen Z, I'm neither fully millennial. So I'm both. So I'm like, all right, Zillenial. I was like, I'm a Zillenial. That's what I am because, even my year 97 for so long, it was, I think even still to this day now, but it's more so that like, okay, Gen Z is like 96, 97, mainly 97 and beyond. But back then it was like, okay, does millennial end at 97 or does Gen Z start at 97? So it's kind of like that bleeding area. So I was like, okay, even these, sociologists or whatever you call the people that study generations, right, don't even know where to place me. So I'm both, bitch. I'm a Zillenial, I don't have to be one or the other. I can be all of it, right? I'm both. LOL, some real Gen Z shit. That's some real Gen Z mentality, right? You don't label me. I'm everything. I'm whatever I want to be. That's some real Gen Z shit. Little did I know. So that's kind of where I came up with the term Zillenial. And, yeah, that's where I was like, okay, I'm a Zillenial, cool. And then as I started telling different people around me, like, some of my friends that were born in 97, or even like my sister who was born in 94, I was like, I'm a Zillenial. I was like, maybe you're a Zillenial too. I was like, I was really trying to sell Zillennials, right? I really be making these terms and I really be trying to sell them, just like in between stuff, Binsta. I really be trying to sell them, and people really be trying to, I don't know, people really be trying to play me like they not and act like they don't want to use the terms. And then when I've like abandoned the terms, they start using it. And I'm like, what? I don't get it. Y'all always copy my flow afterwards, but it's okay. I love being colorful with language. Let's make new words, period. Reclaim this language that was forced upon us called English and make it our own. LOL, some more Gen Z shit. The more I talk on these videos, the more you're like, wait a second, you are Gen Z as fuck. Yeah, I know. Like, I was really trying to sell Zillenial. I was really trying to sell Zillenial, right? And in typical Toby fashion, I was going so hard for this term. Like, I'm a Zillenial, I'm this. This is what Zillenial means to me. You may be a Zillenial. Do you vibe with it? Do you resonate with it? Zillenial. Then, as I started, doing it, and certain people were like, no. I don't know about that. This is a little weird. We'll see. I started to do more research on the generations because, like I said, I just love learning about the different generations. And things started happening in my life, and I have a confession to make. I stopped fucking with the term Zillenial. Not fucking with it as in like, oh, that's a stupid term. No, I still think the concept of Zillenial exists, but I no longer think it applies to me. So, spoiler alert, I no longer identify as a Zillenial. I identify as a Gen Z. I'm actually Gen Z as fuck. The more I learned more about myself and my generation, I realized that, oh my gosh, I'm Gen Z as fuck. I didn't want to admit it, but I'm super Gen Z. Granted, I'm like the oldest of the Gen Z, but I'm super Gen Z. I ain't no Tide Pod eating motherfucker, but they can call me homie because I yeah. I lean more towards the conscious Gen Z, the one, the Gen Z that's like, yeah, we're gonna revolt, we're gonna protest, we're gonna burn your shit down because we can, because it's no longer working, and we're gonna make something better. I lean on that spectrum of the Gen Z because, there's a spectrum of the Gen Z. You got the conscious, and then you got the Tide Pod eaters. But yeah, you know. I'm Gen Z as fuck, so I no longer believe the term Zillenial applies to me. But I do think it applies to a lot of people. And if people in 1997 want to use that term Zillenial, that's cool. But I still see people from 97 that use the term millennial, and I cringe. I'm like, you're not a millennial, baby. And I know you personally, you're Gen Z as fuck. You just don't want to realize it. So building off of that and building off of my journey of how I realized that I'm not a Zillenial, I'm going to tell you what I believe a Zillenial is. So if I was going to break it into timeline, I would say Zillenial is probably somebody born between 1994 to 1997. Maybe 1994 to 1998, maybe that 4-year time period, but just because you're born within that time period does not mean you're a Zillenial. I think it's something that's very personal. You're just born in the Zillenial type era, but doesn't mean you're a Zillenial. Yeah, and even later on in 97 to above, I really don't consider you to be Zillenial at all. Like, I'm born in April, and like I said, I no longer identify as a Zillenial. But if I were to give it a time period, I would give it like that, but more so heavy 1994 to 1996-ish, early 1997. But I'll extend it to 1994 to 1998, but really 1994 to 1996. I believe a Zillenial is somebody who kind of like, they have the aspects of a millennial, right? But they express it in a Gen Z type way. So somebody who is a Zillenial, why do I keep saying fuck? Somebody who is a Zillenial, right? They remember the old school rappers. They remember Biggie, Pac. Like, they grew up listening to them. But they also fuck with Lil Yachty, Uzi, Pop Smoke, may he rest in peace. Who else? Sukihana. They fuck with these new people. Like, they're mixed. Like, if you look at their playlist, it's probably like half and half. Like, they're very cognizant of like the old heads, but they're also very much in the new group, the new people shit, right? They're very much in the mix. A Zillenial is also somebody who they remember the time before the computers, right? They remember the time before the internet and stuff like that. Whoa, that's definitely boomers. I'm so sorry, millennials. Y'all are not that old. They remember the time before... My Gen Z is really coming out. Millennials are not that old. There was definitely computers and the internet in the 80s. Oh my gosh, and 90s. Woo, I'm so sorry. So they remember the time before like smartphones, right? And like the Apple laptop and the iPhone, stuff like that. They remember the time before that. But they're very much savvy with laptops, with smartphones, the iPhone, they're not like Gen X where, Gen X is either or, they're still learning. No, they know how to do this edit, they know how to do that software, they know they're in the mix, right? They're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, right? So someone who's a Zillenial definitely was like, yeah, I had a MySpace, but I also have a TikTok account and I know how to use TikTok very well, right? They knew how to use MySpace very well, that was their shit, but they also know how to use TikTok very well. Then like these older millennials who was like, oh, what is TikTok? These are what the kids are doing. Let me get on TikTok. And they're like, no, bitch, I was on TikTok when TikTok came out. That's a Zillenial. They was on MySpace, but also they was the first one to join TikTok as well. And you would kind of be like, oh, you Gen Z? Like, what's going on? For a lot of these Zillenials, it's kind of, I feel like if when you see them, you would probably be like, which generation are you? They probably have like a younger look, and they'd be like, oh, you're Gen Z, are you Gen Z? No, they just do a lot of Gen Z shit. Like, they express their millennialness through Gen Z outlets, through Gen Z ways, Gen Z philosophy. I feel like Zillennials are more open-minded than their millennial counterparts. And they want to exist less in labels. They're more boundaries, and I feel like they're more radical in their thinking, kind of like Gen Zs are. So they do have that conservative mind state, but they're more radical in certain thinking, certain aspects. Millennials are more forward thinking than Gen X, but Zillennials, they're more of a radical standpoint. So a Zillennial is somebody who probably bought into the idea of college, but they're like, I'm not. They kind of like bought into the idea of college, but they're like, oh no, I'm not going to use that. I'm going to do my own thing afterwards, right? So they're like, yeah, I got this degree to like please this person, but I'm really trying to do X, Y, and Z. So I feel like that's somebody, a Zillennial, because Gen Zs, for the most part, a lot of them are going to college, but they're like, But I feel like a Zillennial, somebody is like, yeah, I'm going to use this to flip what I want to do X, Y, and Z. So I feel like that's how, they're kind of like utilizing both and trying to make it work for them, if that makes sense. Also, I feel like a Zillennial is somebody who, they pretty much remember a lot of the things from the past that, millennials are typically supposed to remember, like, like 9/11 and stuff, but they also, they have that millennial aspect where they're like, remember 9/11, they remember all these other things that happened, maybe they remember Reagan, no, not Reaganomics, but they remember the Clinton presidency maybe, or, they just remember a lot of stuff that was going on in the 90s, That's kind of how I realized that I was not a Zillennial, because a lot of the stuff that my sister and other, people would talk to me about the 90s and stuff like that. They'd be like, oh, do you remember this? And I would be like, oh, no. Or they're like, do you know this? I'd be like, oh, no. And, and it kind of make me feel like I'm a fraud, because I was like, I don't remember this. I don't remember X, Y, and Z. Or in school, they'd be like, oh, you young kids don't even remember 9/11. And I'd be like, what you mean? And they would say, like, millennials remember 9/11, but Gen Z don't. And I would kind of feel triggered a bit like that. Be like, what you mean I don't remember 9/11? But if I'm being honest, y'all, I don't remember 9/11. I don't. I really don't remember what I was doing on 9/11. I can tell you what I was doing the day Aaliyah died, because, that was my homegirl. But I don't remember 9/11. I don't remember 9/11. And at this point, I'm cool with not remembering it. I don't want to. We'll always never forget, may they rest in peace. But I remember Katrina. I remember Trayvon Martin. I remember Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. I remember the COVID-19 pandemic. I think there's enough traumatic events that I remember. I don't think I need to remember 9/11. So sorry. But yeah, they would remember a lot of those types of different things. And honestly, when I was looking more about the people around me, I was like, yeah, and figuring out that I'm like, I'm not a Zillennial, I'm a Gen Z. I was talking to my sister who's born in '94. I was like, you're actually a Zillennial. I was like, because you do a lot of Gen Z type shit. Like, you listen to more Gen Z rappers than I do. Like, I was like, how do you even know these people? Like, you're talking about these new people that I don't even know. You're more on TikTok than I am. Like, I don't even have TikTok. Granted, we both don't have TikTok anymore because TikTok's racist. But I was like, what's going on? I was like, you act more like a Gen Z sometimes than I do. Granted, I feel like I'm probably a bit more radical than she is, but and she actually came around and she was like, yeah, I think I'm a Zillennial. And I'm like, yes, you are a Zillennial. You were born in yes, you are definitely a Zillennial. I'm not. I'm a Gen Z, but you are definitely a Zillennial. So that's kind of how I view, what a Zillennial is and some characteristics for Zillennials. And I feel like there's more characteristics for Zillennials, there's definitely more things. That was just like an overview. Yeah. I probably should have wrote down all my characteristics that I have for Zillennials, so I could have like had more things. But, I feel like this video is long enough anyways, and I feel like you guys kind of get the gist. So that was my video on Zillennials for this Toby Talk episode. And I hope you vibe with it. Like I said, if you're new, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring those post bell notifications down below. And if you're not new, make sure you like and share with your peers. And also, I'd love to know, comment down below. Do you think you're a Zillennial? Are you hardcore millennial? Are you hardcore Gen Z? Which one are you? I'd love to know which one do you identify, with. Or do you think there's another term other than Zillenial that would better explain your experience. You know, let's have a dialogue, let's have a conversation. But that's a Zillenial. I'm definitely a Gen Z. I rep my Gen Z people. A lot of us are problematic, but that's with every generation. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Go with love and light and do what you gotta do. All right, bye, y'all.